Good evening, everyone. I'm Jim Hummel, evening anchor at KATC. And tonight, here at H.L. Griffin Hall, on the campus of University of Louisiana, Lafayette, a debate among the candidates who are running for the 3rd Congressional District seat. We have 7 candidates on stage with us tonight. Each of these candidates was selected based on polling and also fundraising in the race so far. We'll meet the candidates in just a moment, but first, a little bit of words about the format for you tonight. We will have 7 policy-driven questions. Each candidate will have a chance to answer every question. I'll pose the question to the first candidate, who will then get 90 seconds to respond to that question. We'll then move through the line tonight. Everyone else will get 45 seconds on that same question, and then we'll bring it back to the candidate who answered first for a 30-second rebuttal. Each candidate will have a chance to be the first to answer a question and thus get a bit more time. Candidates, you have the questions in envelopes in front of you for reference. Please don't open those envelopes until I've read that corresponding question out loud, and we ask that you please respect time. We have a lot of ground that we want to cover here tonight. Let's meet the candidates. Each has 30 seconds for an opening statement. The order that they're seated here tonight selected at random. Audience members, I ask that you please hold your applause for the end of tonight's debate. And viewers at home, if you'd like to join in on the conversation on social media, use the hashtag LA3Debate. Up first tonight, Mr. Greg Ellison. The floor is yours for 30 seconds for opening remarks.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Greg Ellison. I was raised in South Louisiana. I graduated from West Point. I served in the U.S. Army for 20 plus years. I'm a combat veteran of Iraq. I planned and supervised 9 raids into Iraq prior to the ground war. After the war, I moved home because I wanted my children to know the South Louisiana that I loved. I wanted them to have roots here. I retired, came back to Lafayette, and we started an oil and gas company. My company has created thousands and thousands of jobs for people right here in South Louisiana. Thank you for being here.
Mr. Angel, you're up next.
Good evening. I want to thank ULL and KATC for pulling us together to discuss the issues affecting us here in South Louisiana. I'm running for Congress because I believe there is too much Washington in America and not enough America in Washington, and I plan to focus my career on bringing our unique slice of America to Washington, from the rice field to the cane field, from the oil field to the ball field. I believe that our South Louisiana values need to be talked about in Washington, D.C. I'm prepared to do that, and I ask you to send me to Capitol Hill.
Mr. Guyman.
Thank you. I believe our nation is in a very desperate place right now. Man alone is not going to solve the issues that are before us, the things that we have to do to fix the problems. We need wisdom and guidance from God. I think we need Christians to step up and be a part of that and seek that wisdom and seek the leadership positions. In Ezekiel, it says, I search for someone from among you who would stand in the gap. And I think that's what's calling us today. I think that speaks to our nation right now, that we need to be able to step forward and stand in the gap and begin to restore our country. I hope this evening that I can earn your support. Thank you.
Mr. Reese, 30 seconds.
I'm Grover Joseph Reese. We've got some wonderful candidates who've done some wonderful things in their lives. I think that my own background and skills make me the one who's going to be the most effective congressman. I worked for President Ronald Reagan. We appointed 100 conservative judges. We reshaped the federal judiciary. I worked in Congress. I wrote laws that became law and saved lives on human trafficking and religious persecution. We defunded International Planned Parenthood. I served as a United States ambassador. I'll go to work every day saying, what can I do today to save lives, to have smaller government and lower taxes? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Higgins.
I'm Captain Clay Higgins, Deputy Marshal. I'm in this race because I'm a patriot, not a politician, and I fear for the future of our nation. And I place my faith not in my own skills as a man and a statesman, but in you, in your heart, in your soul, as an American nation, bonded by spirit and love and compassion, by your dedication to your fellow man, and by your hope for a better day and the future of a brighter America.
Thank you, Mr. Rader.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by thanking KATC TV3 for hosting this event, as well as the University of Southwestern Louisiana. I am a 30-year business person with over 30 years of business experience. I think I'm uniquely qualified to be your congressman. But in addition to that, I think I sit in a unique position as Port Director. I think I sit in a unique position to say that I feel our economy must be diversified, and we must diversify our economy with green energy. My name is Larry Rader, number 43 on the ballot.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Rance.
Hi, I'm Gus Rance, and I am fed up with our federal government. But I still love and believe in this great country. The life that I live truly defined the American dream. I was born in government-subsidized housing. I watched my parents work their tails off to provide a better future for us while instilling values of hard work, education, and faith. These are the tools that I've used to build my healthcare company that today employs thousands. I want to go to Washington to lead the next wave of accomplished, accountable leaders, and I need your help to do it. I'm Gus Rance.
All right, candidates, thank you. Let's get right to our questions. We have very policy-driven questions for you tonight. Question 1 will go to Mr. Ellison first, and it's a very pertinent question considering where we are. It's a question about student loan debt. The most recent figures show approximately $1.3 trillion in student loan debt, affecting 43 million borrowers who on average are carrying $30,000 in debt. What is your solution to help alleviate that debt and also help prevent future students from carrying that same burden? Mr. Ellison, 90 seconds.
That's a great question. Thank you very much. We have a massive problem with student debt. It's approximately 1/20th of our entire federal debt in the United States. The average median payment for a student on a monthly basis is approximately $201. The interest rates on that is approximately 6%. We charge our students 6% on their loans, and our banks, the federal government loans the banks at 0%. Why are we making money off our students? We need to restructure those loans so that the students can have affordable loans that they can pay back on a timely basis. You know, one of the things I always look at is that we live in a world of ever-increasing technology changes. And so as I go through, I want to have a program that looks students right in the very eye the first day that they come in to the UL, and they say, hey, look, if you take this major, this is your chances of getting a job here in 4 years or 5 years whenever you graduate. And so you take a look at the job. If that job is not providing you the kind of income that you want when you get out of college, then look at the major that you need to have to be able to achieve that level of income. So I'm all about reducing the interest rates that you guys pay on the student loan debts. It's 6% now. We need to get it down, you know, to be even with the banks. You know, we need to do what's right for the students so they can get the education they need.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Angel.
Yeah, I think recent studies show that 60% of the new jobs that we're going to create in Louisiana over the next decade will require more than a high school degree, but less than a 4-year degree. And while everybody should have an opportunity to attend a 4-year university, not everybody needs to attend a 4-year university. I think we took a wrong turn in America some time ago, and we created 2 classes of citizens, ones that would acquire a 4-year degree and ones that would not. I think it's wrong. I don't think it served our communities, and I don't think it served our families and our country very well. I will be a person who supports the finances of the federal government investing in education, certainly cutting interest rates, no doubt. It is absolutely ridiculous. I know this firsthand. As a father of 5 and as a husband, we're still paying on those college loans ourselves.
Thank you. Mr. Guyman, what would you do?
I think it's obvious to all of us that we need to help higher education do its job. But there's one thing that we did in the legislature while I was serving there, is you got to look at what's driving tuition so high to begin with. We have student debt, and we know that it's a big problem when you graduate to have to go and spend years paying off that debt. It affects you with your new family or your new job or your new occupation, where you're moving and all those kinds of things. But the big question is, why is tuition so high? One of the things I think we can do is make sure that universities are operating efficiently. I think we need to audit them and make sure that those dollars are being spent right. The grant money coming from the federal government to the university system needs to be going directly to help those universities function in a way that will drive down tuition, not drive it up. That seems to be the biggest problem facing students today.
Mr. Reese, 45 seconds.
Well, I agree with several of the recommendations that have been made, but I think you need to take a deeper look at what is driving the tuition up. And it's exactly like medical care. Medical care and college tuition have gone up way faster than everything else in the cost of living in the United States. And the question is it the student loans and is it the medical insurance chasing the increased cost, or is it the cost chasing the availability of insurance and the availability of loans? I'm afraid a lot of times it's the second. We need market-driven solutions on health care and on education. We need people to be able to say no to things that are a good idea but that we simply can't afford.
Mr. Higgins?
When I went to school, tuition in 1979 was $750. It was quite affordable. In my family, I'm the 7th of 8 children. We all went to college. None of us had student loans. It wasn't that long ago in our country that an American citizen that wanted to attain a higher education could work their way through school. In my family, we had a choice. You could work your way through school or join the military, let them pay for it. I ended up doing both. The problem with student loans right now is the expense of education to begin with. Now, for the student loans that exist, they should certainly, it's only the righteous answer to lower those interest rates to the very lowest possible rate available in the United States.
Thank you. Mr. Rader?
You know, that's a very interesting question. I'm going to pull off a Bernie Sanders on everyone in here this afternoon. I think a college education should be free, and I think student loan debt should be forgiven. So one might ask, how are you going to pay for it? Well, I think our tax system needs to be revitalized. That 1% at the top is not paying a fair share of the tax burden, and I think if we tax that 1% at the top, there's a lot of things in this country that could be done, especially when it comes to education and especially when it comes to investing back into our communities.
Mr. Rance?
I'm going to have to disagree with Mr. Rader. I think the biggest problem that we're facing right now in this country is we don't have a value for our education. We have a lack of value. We don't get a return on investment. Costs have gone through the roof, and many reasons are because, you know, federal government subsidies, state subsidies, but the value of the education is something that's sorely missing. We have an economy that's struggling. It's struggling because we have too much government. We don't need an education system to do the same thing. We need to go back to having universities worry about getting good jobs, feeding your family, getting some level of professionalism instead of worrying about enrollment. Enrollment should never be the goal of a university. It should be graduation and then being able to take care of your family, and we've lost that because of the subsidies.
And Mr. Ellison, anything you care to respond? You have 30 seconds.
I agree with the supposition that we need to promote trades, and you can be a plumber, you can be an electrician, and you can make a great living in this world. But we always have to keep in mind that technology is rapidly changing. We need to keep up with the technology. Just recently, there were driverless trucks from all over Europe made their way to the port of Rotterdam. You know, the #1 job in Louisiana and 29 other states is truck drivers. So in 15 years, we may have driverless trucks, so we need to keep up with technology and promote STEM education in our school systems.
All right, thank you, sir. Question 2 concerns health care. Mr. Angel, you'll be answering this question first. The Obama administration has just recently announced that premiums under the Affordable Care Act are going up. What, in your view, should Congress do about rising health care and drug costs? Mr. Angel, you have 90 seconds.
Before I answer that question, I want to strongly disagree with Mr. Rader, Democrat Larry Rader. I absolutely do not believe that we need more taxes. We need more taxpayers in America. We need more people pulling the wagon and fewer people riding in the wagon. When it comes to health care, we need to absolutely repeal and replace Obamacare. Its two stated goals was patient-centered health care and reducing costs. Both have failed miserably. We do not have patient-centered health care. We have removed doctors in so many ways. We have put bureaucrats and insurance companies between doctors and patients in so many ways. It has not worked. It has failed. And the newspapers have been lit up over the last 2 weeks with increase in insurance premiums. We repeal and we replace. And we replace with things that include things like allowing folks to sell insurance across state lines. We provide a tax deduction for individuals that buy health insurance, much like we provide a tax deduction for businesses that do that. We make certainly that we do not fund with any federal dollars any abortions with regards to federal health care dollars. We make absolutely certain that the exchanges that exist now go away because they have done nothing but wrecked the health care system here in America. I will be a a big proponent of absolutely repealing and replacing Obamacare with a marketplace, patient-centered program that works.
Mr. Guyman, 45 seconds.
I read something just a couple of days ago about the increase in the Affordable Care Act, potentially up to 25% in some states, and there was a little comment at the bottom about the number of people who are having to pay that premium, and of course ones of us who are not on that plan and are paying your own, you're absorbing the full amount of that premium increase. But it went on to say that 60% of the people are getting their premiums paid by their business, like it was no big deal. Well, who is paying for that? When a company has to pay the premium increases, it costs jobs in the economy, it costs a profit margin to be reduced. There's no question we need to replace the Affordable Care Act with one that is market-driven, that allows the patient to be in charge, to determine what options they want, and to be able to choose from more than one provider. We've seen co-ops all over the country closing down.
Mr. Reese?
The crisis that Obamacare was supposed to address, was trying to address, was the result of too few decisions about health care costs being made by doctors and patients, and too many by corporate middlemen, by insurance companies, and by government agencies. Well, they took it in exactly the wrong direction. They federalized it, they bureaucratized it more. It was, if you had been designing a system to fail, I don't see how you could have done better. We have got to repeal it. We've got to come up with common sense reforms that really do protect people from catastrophic, unpredictable things, and that allow people to make decisions, that allow doctors to make decisions and patients to make decisions, and put medical care back on the footing that it was 40 years ago, when you could have a baby without medical insurance and you had to pay some money, but it didn't ruin you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Higgins, 45 seconds.
The Affordable Health Care Act, even by government standards, is the worst idea in the history of bad ideas. It's 2,800 pages of psychobabble. An army of attorneys cannot interpret it. Of course, costs are going up. It's run by the federal government, by massive bureaucracy. It's out of control. The reason health care is so expensive in America today is not because of the problem with health care or health insurance, because of health insurance expense. And the reason health insurance expense is so high is because of federal restrictions that will not allow insurance providers to sell across state lines. This is why you have Blue Cross of Louisiana, Blue Cross of Texas. Very quickly, we could fix this thing and let the free market take over if we would allow insurance providers to sell across sate lines.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rader.
Let me remind you that the United States is the only country that we get rid of Obamacare without a federal health care system. Yes, it does have its problems, but should we totally eliminate it? No. What are you going to do with the individuals that's already in the system? There are other ways to work with the Affordable Health Care Act. One thing we can do is increase the number of participants in the program. Another thing we could do is utilize the government to purchase drugs and purchase it in a bulk format. And last but not least, we can roll it over into Medicare, Medicaid. So there are things that we could do if we think outside that box in order to get some of these things done besides just eliminating the Affordable Health Care Act.
Mr. Rance.
The problem with Obamacare, as it's commonly referred to, is that it was nothing more than a tax. It was a land grab for the Medicaid program, which quite frankly is an insurance that not many physicians want because it's ill-conceived. It's typical political jargon. It was named incredibly well, Affordable Care Act, but it had nothing to do with patient care. We have removed the patient, we've removed the doctor, and in a lot of measures we've removed the nurse from patient care. Not one member on this stage or of our United States Congress has my healthcare executive experience. And we spend $1 trillion a year at the federal level. That's why it's a mess. We continually, with no expertise, want to tell every physician, every nurse, and every patient what's good for them. We don't need more of that. We need an awful lot less. Thank you.
And Mr. Ellison.
Obamacare was sold to the American public on 4 fraudulent assumptions. 1, that it was affordable. 2, that you could keep your doctor. 3, that you could keep your health plan. And 4, that enough healthy young people would sign up to offset all the sick people. None of those have come true. In fact, it's imploding. It's driving us to a single-payer healthcare system That's socialism. It's going to fail. We need to step forward, and we need to repeal and replace Obamacare. We need to make sure that we have health savings accounts so you can pay with pre-tax dollars your premiums and your deductibles. We need to make sure we erase state boundaries so that we can sell insurance at a better cost here in Louisiana.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Angel, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Yes, I will be a part of a generation of leaders that will make repealing and replacing Obamacare one of the first things that happens in the next United States Congress.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is dealing with immigration. Throughout this election campaign, we've heard the phrase, build a wall. What is your position on said wall, and do you believe in a path to citizenship for undocumented immigrants who are already here in the U.S.? And what about refugees? What should the U.S. do about them? Mr. Guyman, you're starting us off with 90 seconds.
All right, great question. I want to mention this. I do have a proven record. I did serve in the Louisiana legislature, and in 2008, I actually filed immigration reform legislation, a package of bills that said that the local law enforcement could partner with the federal law enforcement to enforce current immigration law. Not creating any new law, just enforce what we already have on the books. The Heritage Foundation has now listed that as one of the top 5 things that need to be done nationally in order to begin to deal with this problem. Obviously, we need to secure our border for national security reasons, if nothing else. There's a couple of other issues on immigration that I want to mention also along with the refugees, and that is the visa program that we have where we allow people to come to our country legally. We have H-1B visas that we allow people to come here legally to fill jobs in the market that we can't fill, but the big business special interest groups are abusing them. They're displacing the American worker and hiring foreign workers, and that's not what the law allows them to do. That needs to be audited and stopped immediately, and in fact, in some cases, they're having to train their replacement. Intel laid off 12,000 people recently and applied for 14,000 H-1B visas, and I'm telling you, even with Common Core math, that doesn't work. We've got to enforce that and audit that immediately. The refugee program needs to be paused because we have Syrian refugees coming here, 11,000, only 55 of them were Christian, even though 10% of the Syrian refugees are Christian. There's something going on there, and that needs to be paused.
Mr. Reese, 45 seconds.
I worked in immigration enforcement, and I can tell you that to secure our border, to get control over illegal immigration, to stop it, a wall is not going to be enough. We need people. We need people patrolling the border. It's not high-tech. We can do some high-tech things, but we need to find people and deport them with dignity, but firmly, days or minutes after they come in, not 15 years later. We don't need amnesty. But we do need legal immigration. Legal immigration made us great. I'm a grandson of an immigrant and the husband of a refugee, and I hope we, in our effort to get control, we don't stop being America.
Mr. Higgins, 45 seconds.
Yes, I believe our border needs to be hardened and secured. Our southern border existed for 200 years as a soft border. None of us had a problem with a soft border with Mexico, but they ruined that. They've made $1 billion industry out of transporting human beings and drugs across our southern border. Now, the immigrants that exist within our country that traveled here legally, referred to as passive immigrants that have allowed their visas to expire, should be addressed, should be forced to pay a hefty fine, and should be given some path to get their paperwork straight or get out, and get right or get out. And as far as refugees go, the persecution and slaughter of Christian refugees should be top priority regarding access to American soil.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rader.
Well, we are a nation of immigrants, all of us. And for us to sit here and talk about refugees, we all are refugees. The United States of America is the most powerful nation in the world. And there are a lot of people who seek to come to this nation to live the American dream. So what we're going to do, we're going to put a wall up, a wall that's never going to be built. It's never going to be built. I'll tell you, if we're going to build a wall, I hope they build one here in southwest Louisiana so we can stop the floodwaters from coming in.
Mr. Rance, 45 seconds.
We're a nation of Americans. Illegal immigration in this country is kind of like a busted pipe. We cannot begin working on that pipe to fix the problem until we turn off the water. And if a wall is part of that process, if our experts on the border, if we take their handcuffs off, if we give them the technology and the tools to do their job properly, and they say that they need sections of a wall, then I'm all for it. I'm not going to presume to know what goes on the border better than the men and women that patrol it every single day. But we have to acknowledge we have a problem. We also have a problem that 40% of our illegal immigrants in this country today came over on visas. So we not only need to secure our borders, we need to know who's coming in and going. We talk about the refugees. The visa problem alone gives me great pause that we don't know who's coming and going, let alone refugees who may have ill intent. So we have to protect Americans first. Thank you.
Mr. Ellison, your position on the wall.
We are a nation of laws, and we must enforce those laws. We must build a strong wall, reinforced with Border Patrol agents and backed up by world-class electronic systems. You cannot be a welfare state and not control your borders. You will commit economic suicide. And speaking of Syrian refugees, there is absolutely no way that we can vet the Syrian refugees. If they had civil institutions like clerks of courts in Syria, they were destroyed during the Civil War. Just look what's happening at France today. They have committed political and cultural suicide. They've let people come into the country that don't assimilate, that do not learn their language, and you know what they have now? They have priests saying the Mass in Normandy being beheaded. We must protect our borders and build a wall.
Mr. Angel.
Absolutely, we must build a wall. Reagan has taught us that a nation with no borders is no nation at all. I learned as a kid that when you have a leaky boat, you must absolutely plug the hole, or you can bail all night and have the same problem the next day. Before this country can talk about immigration reform, we must show the people of America that we're serious about protecting the border. And there is no way that we can accept refugees from places that do not provide credible information so that we can vet them. We have a responsibility to the citizens of the United States to keep them safe. And when we cannot get reliable data on the background of folks who are trying to come here, that country should be off limits.
Mr. Guyman, 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
When I was in committee room in the Louisiana legislature with the package of immigration bills I spoke about previously, I looked around at the table with me and I realized no one was sitting with me. I didn't understand that all the people in the room were not with me, they were actually against me. My point of that is this: it's going to take courage to solve this problem. It's going to require some very tough votes. I have that proven record. I've had the record of standing up to special interest groups, the administration, and all the leadership when they were wrong. And that's what's going to happen. You have to change that culture in Washington, and you begin that with term limits, and I am running on self-imposing term limits.
Thank you, sir. On to question 4 now. This question concerns foreign affairs. What should be the role of Congress in addressing the conflicts in the Middle East? What ideas do you have for fighting ISIS? And what should the United States do that we're not currently doing right now? Mr. Reese, 90 seconds.
Well, the first thing that we need to do, and Congress very much has a role in this, Congress is often ahead of the executive branch when it comes to recognizing that our foreign policy should be based on American values and that we shouldn't consider it a success when we make a deal with another dictatorship. The first rule should be do no harm. We shouldn't have had that deal with Iran. We shouldn't be making deals with the government of Cuba while they're still imprisoning people who are in jail because they share our values. And yes, it's Congress's job to limit the ability of the executive branch to do those things. As far as the Middle East is concerned, we need to get back to a foreign policy where our friends, and that means Israel, can trust us, and our adversaries know that they have to respect us. And unfortunately, we've drifted away from that. As far as ISIS is concerned, we made a big mistake maybe we made a mistake by going into Iraq, but we sure made a mistake by cutting and running when we did, because we left a vacuum and we created those conditions. We've got to help the forces in that part of the world who are for democracy, who are for freedom, and there are some. The Kurds need to be empowered. The government of Iraq needs to be strengthened, and the moderate rebels in Syria need to be strengthened. And America is a unique country. It's the indispensable country. Our job is to be the good guys. Thank you.
Sir. Mr. Higgins.
The voice of the American people is very clear on this. We must destroy ISIS. It's so common sense clear that we identify our friends across the world and help them to do the job in their areas of the globe to fight this horror that's spreading across the earth. It threatens us within our very borders. We all know it, we feel it, we sense it growing. And yet the voice of the American people is rarely heard. Our intelligence forces know where these guys are. We can strike them hard, we can strike them fast, and we can take them out. But we have to have the courage to do so. The United States federal government no longer reflects the will and the voice of the true American people that sit in this room.
Mr. Rader, your thoughts?
Well, I think the reason we are concentrating on conflicts in the Middle East and in Syria is because of the oil. I think if we diversify our economy here in the United States and utilize green energy, we won't have to send our young men and women into war, into battle. You know, this thing about war and being ready for war is not a good thing for Americans. You know, everywhere we go, we make a decision on whether or not we're going to instill our values on other nations. And I think at some point in time, we need to start looking at home rather than so much abroad.
Mr. Rance?
We need to stop funding terror-sponsoring countries. If we want to remove ISIS, we have to remove their dollars. Unfortunately, that's the only way we're going to destroy them. They're an ideology. Unfortunately, they don't have borders. They don't have a military we can go and fight. We've got to bring all the power we can bring militarily, but we need to stop funding countries that hate us and that sponsor terrorists. And what you mentioned, Larry, about focus on oil and gas, we're still buying 60% of our oil from these countries, mostly because the United States of America has made it so difficult to drill, so difficult to produce. That's an anti-American policy, and that's something that both parties ought to be able to get behind fixing in this country.
Mr. Ellison?
ISIS is a political movement masquerading as a religion. What's going on in the Middle East today is nothing more than a continuation of a 1,400-year-old war between the Shias and the Sunnis to determine the successor to the Prophet Muhammad. Unfortunately for us, ISIS has hopped the fence. It's crossed the ocean. It's killing Americans right here in the homeland. I'm the only candidate in this race that has articulated a plan how to stop ISIS. I published a paper one day before the California shootings. You got to shut off the flow of the money. They make $3 million a day from selling oil. You got to track them from wherever they are, and you got to protect our borders. Hey, the Syrian refugees, there's no way to vet them. The first step in vetting Syrian refugees starts with the United Nations High Command in the Jordanian desert. We have to stop ISIS. They're a clear threat to us.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Angel, what would you do?
I think we need to start by first labeling the enemy, radical Islamic terrorism. We must call the enemy what it is. It is evil. It does not value life and Western values. And if we will have the courage to call it what it is, we will then begin to put together, I believe, a will of the American people, much like we had with communism. I recall as a school kid, we learned the downside of communism, and it brought the will of America to end the Cold War when we had a president who said, when we draw a line in the sand, it matters. We must keep our guns. It starts with keeping our guns, securing our border, vet any immigrant from anywhere, anytime, cut off their money supply, and kill our enemies there before they kill us here.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Guyman?
I think step one in the Middle East is to restore our relationship with Israel. We have certainly abandoned them over the last few years. Our only true ally in the Middle East, a trading partner, a friend, and we have abandoned them with the Iran deal. They no longer trust us, and we need to restore that immediately with the next administration, whoever that may be, and with the next Congress as well. We certainly need to protect our country from attacks from ISIS, whatever that takes. Forget political correctness. We have got to take care of protecting our American people, and the refugee program is part of the problem. As I mentioned earlier, only 55 people out of 11,000 were of the Christian faith that came in under that Syrian program.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Reese, a quick rebuttal.
Well, I agree with many of the things that have been said, but it's important to remember, as a couple of the candidates have said, we're not at war with a religion. we're at war with a totalitarian ideology. And fighting ISIS is a lot like fighting communism. We do need to be strong. We need to be prepared for war. We need to be able to respond when people make war on us, and we're not there. We need a president and a Congress who will make America strong again, and who will make clear that we stand for certain values and that there are certain lines that can't be crossed.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Higgins, you're up next on our next question. Question number 5 we were on. It has to do with police and community relations. The fatal shooting of Alton Sterling by police in Baton Rouge sparked weeks of protests here in Louisiana and around the country. It highlighted a distrust between minority citizens and police agencies. It ended, of course, with the deadly ambush of police officers in Dallas and Baton Rouge. How would you work to restore the relationship between police and communities? Mr. Higgins, 90 seconds.
I speak across the nation to large law enforcement gatherings, annual gatherings of cops and first responders across the South, Texas, Florida, Connecticut, Alaska, California. The problems and issues are the same. The American police officers, we're 1 million strong behind a badge in this country. By far, we are constitutionalists. We understand the absolute observation of civil rights. We have a culture in America of criminality, of idolizing criminality. This has led to a great disintegration of the family structure. And I listened to a minister coach 2 days ago. He told me that one of his students was upset because his best friend got his quote-unquote stripes before he did. And this minister coach asked him, what do you mean by that? He said, man, my boy got arrested before I did. He's been in jail. Think about this. This is a culture. We're not just looking at conflicts between police officers and citizenry. We're looking at the conflict of our entire American citizenry against a culture that idolizes criminality. This is where we need to address this, from the home and the church in America.
Sir. Mr. Rader, 45 seconds.
That's a good question. Police and community relations have always been a problem here in America. And the incident that happened in Dallas was directly attributable to mental health. Those individuals that did the killings, those were prior military guys. Those guys had served, but they hadn't received their mental health counseling. And it's important in the United States that we have a plan, whether it come under the Affordable Health Care Act or not, that we address mental health in the United States.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Rance.
We've lost our ownership in the community and in our family. We've, in many respects, lost our moral compass. You cannot change hearts and minds with legislation. You can't beat someone over the head with it. But we have to restore dignity and ownership in the community. And you do that by having a better public policy than the one we currently have. What we currently have now tells you if you're struggling, if you're a teenager, like my mother was a teenager when she was pregnant, and she went to the government office to get assistance, and they told my mother, a 16-year-old girl, that she'd be better off if she didn't have a job. They could help her more if she didn't have a job. That's a life sentence. We're doing the same thing every single day in our cities and in our communities. We need to start lifting up the entire community. Start lifting people up and not carrying them. And that's the way we restore the ownership and dignity in our own homes.
Mr. Ellison.
The moral fabric of our society is unraveling right before our very eyes. And all nations have life cycles. They crumble from within long before the enemy knocks down the gates. No matter how well-intentioned Lyndon Johnson was with his Great Society programs, they've resulted in the disintegration of the American family unit. A village cannot raise a child. It takes two parents showing up 24/7 from the very beginning, imprinting about the love of God, discipline, respect, the value of hard work and education. And I, as your next congressman, will work to change the laws that promote work and get families back together again.
Mr. Angel.
People will do what you pay them to do. And the policies of our country have often paid people to stay in bed and get a check rather than go to work and earn a check. And that has absolutely contributed to the breakdown of the family unit. When it comes to policing, I would say this, that anybody who has to wear a gun as part of their uniform to go to work and protect the public gets the benefit of the doubt in our America. There's no such thing as a routine traffic stop anymore. I went to the funeral last year of a police officer, a state trooper, who got shot in Bell City, a rural place in Calcasieu Parish, not Houston or Atlanta or Los Angeles, a very rural place. This stuff is showing up at a zip code near you. I think we need to invest in community relationships, federal funding certainly, to help give our officers all the training they need.
Thank you, sir.
And listening to the law enforcement community.
Mr. Guyman.
I think the question is, what can we do as a congressman for those relationships? And I think the thing that I could bring to the table is just leadership, just building the trust in the community with people, working with community leaders, finding the problems, and just building the trust. Because I don't think there's anything that I could do as an individual congressman to make those relationships get better. But I do think you can provide leadership and help build that trust between the church organizations, the government organizations, and the community leaders, and just being there and building those relationships with people in the community so that they trust you and they believe in you and be able to bring those sides together. I think the Christian faith has to come into play here, and we have to try to remove the hatred from our communities.
And Mr. Reese.
I have two brothers who were police officers. One of them died young. I know that they took, and their colleagues took, the idea of protecting and serving as their job very seriously. There are also a small number of people who go into police work for the wrong reasons and who do want to throw their weight around, and people know who those people are. You also have to remember, though, that there are sometimes people trying to shoot police officers and trying to harm them. We need community policing. We need to empower the law enforcement officers who want to get back in the communities, who want to make people understand that they are there to protect and serve the communities.
And Mr. Higgins, an additional 30 seconds.
The job as a cop begins with an oath. And I've told tens of thousands of cops that oath is not to a sheriff or chief or marshal. It's an oath of allegiance to the constitutional principles that are supposed to be engraved upon every badge. It's an oath of allegiance to an American citizenry that hungers for compassionate, constitutionally sound police protection. Once our police officers hear this message, they get it, man. I can bring that to Congress.
Thank you, sir. We're on to question 6 now. This will go to Mr. Rader first. Question 6 has to deal with the Louisiana coastline. The disappearance of Louisiana's coastline is being called the issue of a lifetime. What can Congress do to help restore the coast? And do you think Louisiana's energy sector can help, and if so, how? Mr. Rader, 90 seconds.
You know, that's a very good question. Louisiana has been losing its coastline for the last 20, 30 years. And so one would ask, why are we losing our coastline? You know, the oil industry came in, and when the oil industry came in, they made a lot of cuts in swamps and in areas that created a lot of devastation, not only to wildlife and animals, but also resulted in a loss of our land. So to some degree, I believe that the oil industry is responsible for the loss that we've experienced on our coastline. Now, here's the other side of that coin. Who gave them the permits to do so? And I think Louisiana should be held accountable. Those individuals that gave those permits out at that time should be held accountable. And I think, you know, it's time that we start looking at who we allow to come into Louisiana, these businesses, and to what degree are they going to destroy our environment. And if they're going to destroy our environment to the point where we're not going to be able to utilize the wildlife and have safe water to drink, then we don't need them here.
Mr. Rance, 45 seconds.
As with anything you do in life, you need to make a plan. We've been dealing with our coastline issues for a very long time, for decades, in fact. And part of the problem is we haven't had a cohesive plan. We haven't had a cohesive voice. Our federal delegation, our state delegation like to argue and point fingers and blame everybody under the sun. The reality is we have a major problem. We all are aware of this. What we've been doing isn't working. We've got 37,000 people employed with the Army Corps of Engineers They're mediocre at doing things the way they've always done it. They're absolutely atrocious at doing things a different way. It shouldn't take 10 years to get a permit, to maybe get a permit, to maybe dig a ditch if a guy in West Virginia deems it worthy. I think it's time that we actually bring some of this closer to home and make some decisions closer to home. But we've got to work on empowering local citizenry to do that, local boards.
Mr. Ellison.
No one is against restoring the coast, but our current governor wants to sue the oil and gas companies. They operated within their permits. Have some of them done it wrong? Yes, we should pursue them. But we don't need to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. If we sue the oil companies and we drive them out of the state of Louisiana, where are you going to go for jobs? Where are you going to go for jobs? We're all going to have to move outside of the state. So we need to look at the Corps of Engineers, and they're the main culprit. They've levied up the Mississippi River. They've got all the sediment going in the Deepwater Gulf, and that's the sediment you need to restore the coast. That's the major culprit. Look at the Corps of Engineers. We don't want to kill the goose that laid the golden egg. We don't want to go after our oil and gas companies so all our children and grandchildren have to move away.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Angel.
Yeah, one, I think, has to take a look at how we got here. And we got here of the unintended consequences of a federal decision to levee the Mississippi River in the name of flood control that absolutely cut off the ability to have silt and sediment deposited in coastal Louisiana. And that decision is a decision that has begun to show up in the 70s and more so lately. Congress can start by doing two things. First of all, we can make sure that Louisiana gets its share of federal offshore revenues as inland states collect 50% of the money from revenues on their lands. The coastal states should as well. That public policy needs to be changed. And we need core reform. It makes no sense to have studies after 20 and 30 years and restudying the same things. It's time for action. We can do that through an effective Congress.
Mr. Guyman.
As a legislator, I was a leader of a group called the Fiscal Hawks as we tried to deal with budget reform here in the state of Louisiana with the fiscal irresponsibility that was going on in this previous administration. They were raiding the coastal fund that we as taxpayers dedicated money to begin to restore our coast. They were raiding it. They were laundering the money through there so they could spend it recklessly instead of dealing with the budget issues like they were supposed to. They were in violation of the Constitution, and we challenged them on it. I have a proven record of fighting on this issue. I authored legislation that got through the House of Representatives to prohibit the previous administration and all the people working for them that were pushing for this to continue to launder that money that should have been going to the coast. As a congressman, I will work with the state delegation and with the administration to make sure that money goes where it's supposed to go and we restore our coast.
Mr. Reese, how about you?
Everybody wants to restore the coastline. Everybody wants to protect our environment. Some of what's been talked about is part of the solution. We do need to make sure Louisiana gets its fair share of those funds. We do need to make sure that the Army Corps of Engineers starts behaving as though it were not a government agency. But remember that environmental regulation, like other forms of regulation, how much you want is exactly what Goldilocks wanted. We want not too much and not too little. We want just enough. And if you react in a crisis, if you react to a crisis by giving a federal agency too much power, you will get way too much regulation. You'll get vindictive regulation. You will kill the goose that laid the golden egg. We need to watch out for that.
And Mr. Higgins.
The Louisiana coastline has been changed by natural occurrences of oceanic tides and storm surges since Christ was a cowboy. And the Mississippi River delivered silt throughout that time. The ocean would erode the coast, and the Mississippi River would deposit the silt back inside Louisiana. It was a natural process. We decided 100 years or so ago to levee the Mississippi. So this changed this natural process. But now we have many, many areas in South Louisiana that are forced to dredge in order to have ship access and commercial travel. That dredged silt could, in my opinion, could easily be piped into areas where coastal erosion is most serious.
Thank you, sir.
That's
And
an
Mr.
ecologically sound solution.
Mr. Rader, 30 seconds.
Sure. You know, I believe the oil industry is partially responsible for some of the damage that we have here in Louisiana. Now, the thing is to what degree and to what point should we hold them accountable? But I also believe by the same token that the environment is changing. And the environment is changing because of us. because of fossil fuels. And so we need to look at that as well. And that's why moving to green energy is so important. The rise in the sea level is directly attributable to the warming of the earth.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Rance, you will answer this next question first. We are on question 7, our final question, and this has to deal with the effectiveness of Congress. The approval ratings for Congress are low, nearing single digits. This election cycle has been divisive among Democrats and Republicans. With that division in mind, how will you work to be an effective member of Congress? How will you bridge the gap between parties to help tackle major issues like the national debt, entitlement issues, economic issues here at home, namely the recent downturn in the oil and gas industry? Mr. Rance, 90 seconds.
Well, I'm from South Louisiana, so the best way to bring people together is going to be good food. I think that's number one. I mean, the reality is we have a very, very partisan system. We have Democrats and Republicans, and we're all fed up because none of them are representing us. That's why I'm running for office. We have got to get back to remembering who puts us in office. It really doesn't matter what 434 other districts think of the job I'm doing of representing the people of this district. I think we forget about that. It's very easy to get up there and you put on your blinders and you live in a bubble and you think you're doing very, very important work. And next thing you know, we're sending $1.3 billion to Iran, and we all think it's a good idea. I think we have to remember where we come from, and we have to expect more out of the people there. I've been told a lot of times that the system somehow corrupts people, that the system is broken. I don't allow our representatives off that easy. Hold them accountable. The reality is a system does not corrupt a person corrupts themselves. And so we've got to stop putting great salesmen in office, and we need to put accomplished, accountable leaders in office. I have a resume of turning hospitals around. That's what we do. We take over very, very distressed operations. We have to make very difficult decisions and prioritize our spending. It's called making a plan. It's called making a budget. It's what a lot of us have done throughout our entire life. It's what Congress's job is to do, and they're failing on the job, and that's why the approval rating is so low. They need to simply do their job.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Ellison.
This upcoming congressional race is vital. Our country's in trouble. Our world's in trouble. We face ISIS. We face the national debt. We face the border and securing it. We face the moral fabric of our society unraveling. So it's about proven leadership. My leadership skills were formed on the grounds of West Point, honed on the battlefields of Iraq, and strengthened as a businessman and a leader here in South Louisiana. The Lafayette Daily Advertiser brought all the candidates in. They vetted us all, and they unanimously voted for me as the candidate they endorsed, is standing above all the rest. Our country awarded me the Bronze Star and the Legion of Merit for my leadership in the most trying of human conditions, war. And I will be a great congressman for you, and I will lead the way. Thank you.
Mr. Rangel.
I think the effectiveness of Congress can start by understanding and preaching that government cannot be everything to everybody and shouldn't. If Congress will focus on what it is that they were sent there for, I absolutely believe that Congress can be more effective. The first thing I would say is that we have to do is make certain that we take back the authority that has been eroded by the legislative branch in favor of the executive branch. The executive branch has the authority to regulate, which is too much authority because it takes away the ability to legislate. And while I certainly appreciate Greg's comment about the Daily Advertiser, I would remind folks here that the Daily Advertiser also endorsed Hillary Clinton.
Mr. Guyman.
I never wavered on principle when I was in the Louisiana legislature. Took some tough positions, leader of the Budget Hawks, leader of the anti-Common Core movement, traveled the state doing that, fought the administration on their fiscal irresponsibility. And despite all of that, I was able to lead and build relationships and bring people together. 20 members of the Black Caucus, 20 members of the Rural Democrats, 20 members of the Conservative Republicans came together under my leadership, and we scored a victory on the House floor with 60 votes against the administration, throwing every single tool they had at us to defeat us on a budget reform issue. You build relationships, you earn their trust, your word is your word, you bring people together, and you lead, and you get things done. I've proven I can do that. I did it in the House of Representatives, and I will do it as your congressman.
And I want to correct what I misspoke. I said the Daily Advertiser did it. It was actually the USA Today Gannett, the parent company.
Thanks, sir. Mr. Reese.
Thank you, Scott.
Mr. Reese, 45 seconds.
I worked in Congress for 10 years. I didn't usually like it, but I stayed because it was possible to get things done. We passed a bipartisan bill on human trafficking, modern-day slavery, making the United States really declare war on that modern-day slavery, and we've made a lot of difference, and we saved lives. We did things on, passed laws on terrorism. We passed laws on religious persecution. The key is to treat people with respect, to understand other people's positions, to know where you can compromise, but to make them understand that you will never compromise on principle. Sometimes we do it the other way. We call them a communist, and then we cave, and then we write a fundraising letter and call them a communist again. That's not the right way to do it.
Mr. Higgins, 45 seconds.
Respectful, compassionate communication is the key to solving any problem, and it's certainly true for America today. I'm the 7th of 8 children. My family reflects every shade of ideology, and yet we gather. We gather as one with love and respect for each other. And yes, we have healthy debate, and no, we don't always agree. But we always agree on our love and respect for each other. My family is reflective of the American family, and I believe that through statesmanlike communication with civility and decorum, we can move forward through the challenges that face our nation, but it's founded on love and respect for each other.
Mr. Rader.
I'm afraid I have to agree with the group. You know? Yes, it all begins with love. It all begins with respect. It all begins with trying to understand that other individual. You know, you may not always agree with someone, but they're not your enemy. They're not your enemy. You just have a difference of opinion. And sometimes that difference of opinion can bring out and foster new ideas and a solution to solving some of the problems that we have in this nation. I think every last one of these gentlemen up here love their country. I know they do. But sometimes we have a difference of opinion, but we don't have to stop talking. When you stop talking, that's when you start having problems, like not getting things done in Congress.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Rance, a quick rebuttal.
We started with humble means as a kid. I hope many of you have seen my commercial. We used a calculator to go shopping. That's a very true commercial. Politicians have the luxury of going shopping with our money. They write a check with our money, and they pat each other on the back about what a great job they've done. In my business, in my life, I've had to write a check with my money, and that makes me very accountable. And I think that's part of what we have lacking up there is people who actually have a resume, who have dirt under their nails. There's lots of paper on the walls in Washington, D.C. There's not enough people with dirt under their fingernails. Thank you.
All right, thank you, sir. And gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. We don't have enough time left for closing statements, but I do appreciate you all talking very candidly about the issues, and I think we got a lot of ground covered tonight, so thank you for that. That does conclude tonight's debate, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. Our thanks to the candidates, of course, Acadiana Open Channel, the University of Louisiana Lafayette, the College of Liberal Arts, and the Department of Political Science. Don't forget to get out and vote. Ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for the candidates and for everyone at KATC.
And a round of applause for our moderator. He's done an excellent job, please. Give him a round of applause.